So in this short video, I'll talk about one question that you should ask yourself and answer to write a good discussion chapter, or at least to have a good idea of what to write in your discussion chapter. And it's not even a clickbait because it's really a matter of answering that one question. It will help you a lot with the clarity. And to explain that, I'll also talk about the key strengths, the key advantages and disadvantages, the key challenge of writing a discussion chapter. And there is also a big plot twist, as in every good story. So first, let's start with the key challenge, the key barrier, the most difficult thing about the discussion chapter. I have several videos about discussion chapter. I will refer to them throughout this video whenever relevant. So the key challenge, and I often say that, is that discussion chapter is probably the least defined chapter, the least defined in terms of structure. So it's very difficult to actually find good guidelines for what to include in the discussion chapter. It tends to be pretty vague. There are, however, certain rules and something that always has to go there. So as I said, I have other videos about it, but just in short, you absolutely have to include certain references to the literature in your discussion chapter. So the actual discussion means trying to position your findings in that existing literature, existing research. So that absolutely has to be in every discussion chapter. The second element is some sort of a discussion. So again, it's some personal voice, some subjectivity, some interpretation sometimes. So that's the second thing that absolutely has to be in that chapter. And after this, there is literally nothing in terms of the guidelines. So how do I write that discussion? That's, of course, a big problem. And now, very early in this video, time for a plot twist. So a big plot twist that you should like, because the best thing about the discussion chapter, I just talked about the biggest challenges, is also that there are no guidelines. So it's the same thing. If you learn to appreciate it, you actually realize that it's a very good thing about it. So same thing, same as our barrier. It can be problematic, of course, if you don't have guidelines, but it's also the best thing about that chapter. And why is it the best thing about that chapter? It's because you can literally own that chapter. And that's usually what I advise my students or clients. You have to own that chapter. It's your chance to showcase so many things, basically. And also, if you're a student, it means that there is less scope to criticize you. Of course, there are many reasons why you can be criticized for that chapter. If it's too short, if there is no relevance to the literature, and many other things, if it's unclear. So there are arguments that can be used against you. But otherwise, it's kind of difficult to criticize you because it's really the chapter you own. So it depends on how you organize it, how you want to sell it to the reader. Based on that, you will write that chapter. So there's little to criticize in terms of, for example, the structure. So that's generally a good thing. So what about the content of that chapter? What about that question to ask yourself? What about that answer? So basically, in terms of the content and how to organize it, what to put into that chapter, I do have a video where I talk about 4 possible scenarios or structures for you to choose from. So I won't talk about the exact structure of the chapter. I have that video. I strongly recommend that you watch it if you're maybe trying to find an idea for that chapter. But what is more important for any of these scenarios is that question. And the question is, what is it that I want my reader to understand about my study? That's that question. So it's a very simple question. What is it? What is it that's so good about my study? What is it that's innovative about my study? What is the main takeaway from my study? So that's the question that you should ask yourself, because then you need to communicate that answer to your reader. That's what the discussion chapter is really about. So in your findings chapter, your results chapter, you showed the reader all this evidence from the data. You showed all these quotes. You explained what your participants said or whatever the data set that you were using. There is so much data, there is so much evidence. But remember, it's completely different to be the reader from being you. You are immersed in that study, and to you, usually more often than not, it's pretty obvious how you answer the research questions, why it's important, what we learned. But remember, the reader is in a completely different situation. And quite often you have to lay it out in front of them, just be direct. So they've seen all that evidence. You've seen my videos, I compare discussion to cooking. So if in your results chapter, you're laying out all the ingredients, plenty of ingredients, that's impressive, but the reader doesn't know how to cook. So in the discussion chapter, you have to explain what you're going to cook with these ingredients. So that's literally what you have to do here as well. So basically you have to be direct and explain why is it important, why the findings are actually good, why are they relevant, what you want the reader to understand. So the core of your story, the core of the story of your data, if there's one thing that you believe these findings help us, for example, understand or solve, that should be the core of everything in your discussion chapter. So that's that first question. Then whatever way of organizing the chapter you adopt, so again, things I discussed in that other video, it will all depend on or be based on this one answer to that question, because you have to have that clarity first. Imagine this is your time on the stage, your presentation, your lecture, your movie, where you decide what the key things are, the most important things are. And although this may sound simple or basic, you'll be surprised at how many times people don't know the answer to that question, or simply once asked that question, they usually eventually do know the answer, but they forget to ask themselves this question. And I base this on many interactions with my students and clients. So I know some things I take for granted are not always so obvious. That's why even if it sounds silly, even if it sounds like a small thing and not something that will solve all your problems, believe me, having this clarity about this one question will help you a lot, or at least I hope that it will. But if you still have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments, and please like the video if you enjoyed it to help others find it on YouTube, and consider subscribing if you're not a subscriber yet.